Okay, hello again, and here's Philip Steiger again at thebest3d.com, and this time we'll look at two features, one of them not new, but new, another one new, and they kind of go hand in hand. And this feature I'm talking about is seamless textures that are also loopable, animated textures. Now this one here, there's also some additional transformation going on, so I did a little bit too much here. Let's start from scratch. Let's say you start initially with let's make it a 640 by 640 square, right, and so you want to do an animated texture and then a loopable one, which means that you won't see when it ends and suddenly jumps back to the start, and then also make it seamless along the edges so that you can tile it and it's still loopable and endless, and you could use that, for instance, as a endless animation map of or elevation map in the ray tracer Puppy Ray to generate some fantasy landscapes that are endlessly repeating but also animated and changing over time. So let's have a look at doing that. What we'll do is we'll create an animation of let's say 80 frames. And done that, now we're going to the timeline and putting some sort of content into that animation, right? So for instance, one thing you could do is take the Perlin noise animated filter and perhaps play with those parameters to have larger sizes, the speed, change a little bit faster, the type. There's a couple of different styles. Let's go with this one and apply that. All right, so this is producing an animated Perlin noise that's going frame for frame into the animation. And so you see that now, and you can scrub through that. Now let's say I wanted this actually a little bit slower. We got 80 frames, and let's say we want about 2 or 3 times as many. One thing you could do is use the time stretch to multiply it by 2 times or 3 times, put in the desired number of frames. But we know that sometimes that will introduce some artifacts, kind of a strobing effect. Another technique might be perhaps more appropriate, especially in this case where there's a lot of noise already, and that would be to use the motion prediction module, because the motion prediction module could have some side effects too, but they are usually of the nature of the side effects is kind of slight distortions that might actually not be very visible with this particular demo, this particular animation, because it basically looks like it's distorted all the way already. So what we'll do is we'll do a dry run and just run it like this, and this is going through, just giving us an idea of what it will look like, and we don't see much of the distortions, and it's basically usable. So what we'll do is we'll render that. As soon as this dry run is over, let's go undo the checkbox here and run it. And one thing to keep in mind when you do motion prediction, motion estimated interpolation, is that the last frame in this, the first frame in this, will actually be a continuation of the last frame, and so we will need to toss it. The first frame we have here kind of makes a jump. If we go to the next frame, we can see a sudden jump. Not with the ones after that, but the first one we'll want to delete. And so we now have an animation that's nicely smooth and animated, but it's not loopable yet, meaning that if we close this and if we go too close to the end of the animation and then play it, the moment we reach the end of the animation and cycles back to the first frame, we will see a jump. There it is. Alright, so there is a need to make this loopable from right there. So one way to do that is you right click on the timeline and make loopable right there. And that loopable code is going to basically take a certain number of frames that are at the end of the animation and make them fade in towards the beginning, and also cut them off at the end. So it's going to actually make it a little bit of a shorter animation. If you have a long animation and you want to just blend the first half of it over the last half of it, the second half of it, you can do that. This will work well when you have cloud patterns that constantly change and there's a lot of noise on them. In this one here, it might work too. What we'll do is we'll perhaps keep it a little bit longer though. Let's keep it something like this. Alright, so now we have a bunch of frames that are being cut off at the end and blended and copied over to the beginning and blended in while or blended out while the existing frames at the beginning are blended in. And so that now ensures that we have a loopable animation with no sudden jump. Now you might still occasionally see a little bit of a blended transition here. So the nature of what's being made loopable here really affects a little bit as to how good that is and whether you can use it. But at least it's not a sudden jump. And you know, if you do some more transforms, maybe some contrast enhancements and other things, you will eventually get rid of that blended transition appearance, and it will look fairly decent. So what you could do next is to say, well, okay, now we have this in a loopable way. If we play it, we don't see a sudden cut or a sudden jump when it reaches the last frame and jumps back to the first frame. It's just a constantly looping animation. And the next thing we want to do also is make sure that we don't see a cut along the edges or a transition along the edges. Right now we see that. For instance, if we go into, let's say, this filter here under Transforms 3D Perspective, there it is. As you translate, as you rotate this, you can tell where the cut is. You can see the edge. In fact, you can say do not repeat it, and you can see where it is right there. So if I click the do repeat, or repeating, you can see, oh yeah, there's a transition there. It's just not fading across because it's not seamless. It's not a seamless texture at this time. And of course, we do want quite often textures like these to be not only loopable but also seamless. Okay, so right now you see here in the middle, this we want to blend across the edge so that it appears to be seamless. So the way to do that is simply, when you have it as an animation, to simply go to Image and say Make Seamless. Now it will do that already for the single frame. You can adjust how much blend transition you have, how much overlap. The initial 12 or 13% is usually a fairly good one to use, but you might want to dedicate a little bit more. And keep the original size. When you do that, if you have the option here to say keep the original size, click OK, and it will in that case also ask you if you want to apply that to the entire animation. Alright, to the current animation. And I'm going to go yes, and so now you see that in the top there on the timeline, it's going across the entire animation and making each frame seamless, so you end up having not only a loopable animation that's seamless in time, but you also end up having a tileable or seamless transition or images, a sequence of images, and that means that you can now tile it. So for instance, if you go back to the animated, where was it? Transform 3D Perspective, you can see that it's really hard now to tell where the seam was. You can see it if you turn off the repeating part, but this side on the right here will find a corresponding end and transition on the left side, and same thing with top and bottom. So you can transition, you can go one way or the other. You may detect sort of a pattern, but it's not going to have a sudden cut. It's not going to do it's not going to reveal where the seam was, right? And so that's the idea, is that you can now create beautiful animations that are seamless and tileable, therefore, and then also loopable. And so for instance, if you do something like this one here, or even better, if you, well, let's do this one. Before I do that, before I apply that, you might want to save it. In fact, what I'd like to do really is see what that looks like if I put that into Puppy Ray. So let me do that. Let me go into Filter, Transform, Puppy Ray, and there we go. Let's look for some additional parameters. Let's make it a little bit less in the elevation, less mountainous. Let's change, let's see, a couple of parameters here. Preview quality, let's give it medium quality, and do a quick test ray trace. And there you go. So what I'll do now is perhaps actually make it a little bit faster. I'm still rendering 2 or 3 other sessions here of Dog Waffle at the same time in the background. So I'm going to go to preview quality and make it even a little bit smoother by increasing the pre-filtering. We probably don't need the anti-aliasing at this point, just for this quick test. Ray trace that. Alright, so that's going to go a little bit faster. And what I'll do is I'll increase the fog so that it's not cutting off too quickly, and we can actually see much farther into distance. And then I'm also going to move the world down a little bit so I can really see much farther into the distance. And let's reduce the intensity of the light, or move the light up a little bit. Yeah, let's keep it so it's keep it low so it's reduced. It's casting shadows, but let's give it perhaps a slightly different color, and then also make it less intense so we don't see too much of that bright spot here in the front. But anyway, now if you look at that, you can go and animate through that, right? And you will want to make sure that you use each frame as an animation. And so that way, the only thing left to do now is to say where you want to be at the beginning of the animation, such as, well, let's be around here and look that in this direction. So let's keyframe that. And now we'll just move very slowly forward, but far enough that we can tell we have reached another one of those tiles. And yet we will not see any sort of seam or sudden cut or anything like that. So it is a loopable animation still that turns into an elevation map, and it's still also a tileable, seamless texture on each frame of that animation. Let's go keyframe that and go. Let's go animate this and render that. So now we are rendering every frame as we fly across that, and basically go over the multiple tiles there. That's an example of where you can use the tileable, loopable and seamless textures really beautifully. But there are many other places. In fact, you might want to export this type of texture into maybe an AVI or image sequence, and then use them in some other programs where you do need that too. Tileable or loopable and tileable or seamless textures like these can really be great if, for instance, you want to show caustics of light, refraction and reflection at the bottom of the ocean. You want basically that play, that spiel of water and light going across the ocean floor. That really is a great way to use it, and you don't want to see a sudden cut or a repeat jump or something as it goes from the last frame to the first frame. So that's basically what this tutorial is about, is to show you how to create those looping textures and seamless textures that are animated and loopable. And that's that. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your dog waffle. PD Howler 9. PD Howler 9 is out now, September 2013, and the artist edition also. And you'll see that at squirreldome.com as well as thebest3d.com.